Brian Reisinger grew up on a farm. He left the farm, and then years later, he came back and he realized what had happened to the farm that had been in his family for more than a century, and he knew he had to do something. Hi, I'm Dave Price, and this is the American Farmland Owner Podcast. Brian decided to rely on what he had learned while he was away from his farm in southern Wisconsin. He had become a print journalist. He learned about business. He ended up working in politics and in public policy. But when he came back, he had to watch his dad give up on the family's multi-generational commitment to dairy and then figure out what else to do next. But why did it have to happen this way? And what can be done to not only keep farming as an option for families, but also to encourage new people to get into the industry? That is why Brian wrote a book. It's called Land Rich, Cash Poor, My Family's Hope and the Untold History of the Disappearing American Farmer. We're going to talk about the book in a bit, but first, how Brian got to this place. All right, let's talk about, I feel like you're like a blender where there's a bunch of background stuff all thrown in and bam, here you are. Can you talk about, let's talk about all the stuff you've done to get you to the point, can you?
Yeah, well, it's been a little bit of a tortured journey. I'll try to spare too much of the blood and gore, but no, so I grew up on a farm in southern Wisconsin. So I'm a farm boy from the start. Grew up working with my dad from the time I could walk, and I pursued a career off the farm in writing. So I've been in business journalism and I worked in public policy, and I still work a little bit in consulting. But what I really tried to bring to this book is sort of a farm boy who grew up knowing farms are disappearing from the beginning, and then somebody who had the opportunity through my writing career to see up close the economic system that was leaving those farmers behind. And so I've tried to bring that to this and tried to tell a personal story, yes, about our family from the Great Depression on up through today, surviving all the things that a farm family in this country survives, all the economic hardship and accidents and weather that blesses and threatens, but then also a little bit of a sense and knowledge of how the economy works or doesn't work and how that's affecting our farms.
So let's talk about your family's connection to this. You all were all about dairy for a long, long time, like a century, right?
Yeah, that's right. So my great grandpa escaped pre-World War I Europe to come to Wisconsin and dig a living out of the dirt. And he arrived in the early 1900s when Wisconsin was arriving at its niche as America's dairyland. So Iowa, Wisconsin, all these states found what their different niches were at different points in history. In Wisconsin in the early 1900s, dairy was emerging. And the reason was we had fertile ground, but we couldn't grow the amount of, at the time, the big crop was wheat. And we had all these hills, all the people in Iowa who drive up across the Wisconsin border, they run into all these hills, and you get around Dubuque and stuff too. And so we didn't have that wide open acreage to plant as much corn as you guys can, or plant as much wheat as they could in, Kansas or Nebraska. And so Wisconsin evolved from wheat toward crops that could be grown to feed to milk cows to make, them really healthy to produce a large amount of dairy products. And that was a function of farmers experimenting with different things and researchers finding that this was the science was behind it, and the industry advocates working to build Wisconsin farming into something. So my great grandparents came and they started working the land at a time when it wasn't clear what kind of farm made sense in Wisconsin. It was very entrepreneurial. There was a lot of changes going on, and they came into their own in advance of the Great Depression, just as Wisconsin was sort of emerging as America's dairyland. So they were there for the dawn of that, and then 4 generations we continued it for more than a century up until my dad. We're still farming today, but he made the decision to sell the herd and diversify the farm just because of the way that dairy's changing and the challenges of doing it as a small family farm these days.
And that was only about 3 years ago, right?
Yeah, that's right. Spring of 2021. And so now my dad is still farming. My sister's working to take over the farm from him, and they're raising custom heifers for other dairy herds. So they're raising milk cows for other herds. They're raising beef for consumers, and they're cash cropping. And we had the hope of being able to continue onward. We kept our land. It's not like we didn't get to a place like some guys do where they got to sell their herd and they got to auction the land. They lose a lot of stuff because of debt or whatever else. We're very lucky that wasn't us. very lucky to have the land and to have a plan to continue it forward. But at the same time, there's the uncertainty any farm faces as you're making changes. And selling that dairy herd is, it's the closest comparison I've heard that's accurate is it's akin to death in the family, and that's the way my dad felt. We tell that story in the book about what it was like to go through that change. And it's not an easy one. And it was one that led to a lot of dark and difficult times as we were making that transition, even though we did have hope for the next steps into the future.
And so going through that, while that has to be a time of despair and frustration and sadness and all of that, and surely the burden on your dad, who is trying to continue this that had gone on for previous generations for him, what then allowed the family to have the optimism in 2020, 2021 of not just saying, man, we're tired.
Yeah.
Let's just sell it all. And as you get into in the book, and it's the title of the book, I mean, the value is the land, right? I mean, you
Right.
can get a pretty nice check there,
Yeah.
and it's a lot easier on the body, maybe, rip your heart out. But what was the optimism to say, all right, what we're actually going to do is pivot here?
Yeah. Well, it was about the next generation, and like you said, the book's title, Land Rich, Cash Poor. You got this valuable land and you hold on to it, and it's harder and harder each year to make a living on it.
Hmm.
And you got to, a lot of farmers are living that fear of facing their family saying, we can't make it. You got to, keep going or maybe risk not making ends meet one day. Or the flip side is you can sell that land, it's valuable, but you lose everything else because it's your
Hmm.
home, community, it's your heritage. And so the thing that kept us going, and I think that made us decide this is the right route, is the next generation. My sister working to take over the farm for my dad, her kids coming along. As I say, I'm still involved in the business side a little bit, and they throw me in a tractor on a day off. But my role is really more telling our story, and that story is one of my dad seeing his daughter wanting to carry this forward and having her kids grow up on the farm too. And so that's what kept us going. And I'll just say really briefly, although it's a topic into its own, that didn't come easy. We in some of the opening pages of the book, we tell the story of my dad. The day after we sold the cows, we were sitting on the porch, sun coming down. It was a bright day. We had, the hope of the future. We didn't have any debt on the farm, so we kept our land. And he was feeling dark storm clouds, and he was not to make it too arduous here, but he was facing what a lot of farmers do, which is dark thoughts of hurting himself. I mean, farmer suicide is a really serious issue. Mental health is a serious issue. And he didn't for the same reason, the next generation. He got to think about his grandkids. And we pulled out of it and we talked a lot. And we ended up having a story of hope and moving forward, but it doesn't come without difficulty. And I say it only because I know it's true for so many families. And, that's why we decided to tell that raw of a story too.
So you grew up on the dairy farm. You spent years as a print journalist, right? Newspaper guy?
Yeah, yep. I was in newspapers in Wisconsin, and then I went out to Nashville. I had to, like all 25-year-olds, I had to go spread my wings somewhere. And so I went to Nashville to try something totally different. And being the home of country music, I didn't feel like I was that far from rural America.
Yeah,
It was
for
a
sure.
little further away than I thought it was. But and I was in business journalism there and covered politics for a while before getting into public policy myself.
You sing it all?
Oh, I sing a little karaoke. I mean.
All right. I mean, you got to if you go to Nashville, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Even if it's liquid courage to get you out there, you
Yeah,
at
exactly.
least got to try it. But I
Exactly.
guess what I was wondering is, did you see the farm when you came back? How did you see the farm? Because you were
Yeah.
off it enough that it did it change your perspective?
Yeah, it did. I always loved where I grew up. I always appreciate growing up in the country and that. But when you're young, especially if you feel you're not cut out for, which I didn't have the talent for cattle and crops, my dad did, and that's why I pursued a writing career. I had to find my own passion and my own calling. And when I went out and did that, that love that I'd always had for where I grew up, man, it became like just like a gravitational pull. As soon as I was in Nashville, I could feel the desire to be out and about reversing, and I wanted to remain tied to home. And so when I came back, it was such a deeper appreciation than I could have had if I hadn't left. And also, you know, a lot had happened. I mean, farmers were in an even deeper crisis. I mean, if I had known at the age of 25 or the age of 18 what the farms were going to look like when I was 28, 30, 35, I don't know. I don't think I would have pursued a different career, but I think I would have had alarm bells going off in my head a lot earlier about what was happening in this country. And I remember covering the economy in Nashville. I was talking to a banker one time, and he said, "Oh yeah, well, there was the recession after 9/11, and then there was the Great Recession in 2008, but in between there was all these good years, and I remember thinking, when in the hell were the good years?"
Hmm.
And it's because I had grown up in the rural economy, the farm economy, where, like, there's a lot of resilience, there's a lot of proud industry in Wisconsin, Iowa, all these Midwestern states. There's a lot of good, you know, strong, proud industry, but it's always been battered. Year after year, the good times aren't as good as they used to be, and the bad times are worse than they used to be. And so the idea that there were some good years was kind of foreign to me. And I thought, wow, there's a whole economy out here that is really left behind, places like where I'm from. And that's really where the idea for the book began to be born too, to be honest with you, is just seeing that difference between what I knew was going on at home and between the economy that I was encountering, when I was out and about in the world.
Can you talk a little bit about the the community at home? What has that been like in so many of the rural communities? You have population shrinking, and as a lot of the farms have gotten bigger over the years, takes fewer people to operate. More and more people leave town, don't ever come back, and it's kind of this vicious cycle, right? And we see that in so many different states. What's the circumstance for you?
You hit the nail on the head, unfortunately. I hate to say it. My home county of Sauk County lost its uh had a decline in the number of 20 to 24-year olds ever since the 1940s onward. That's happened every decade. And the reason I zero in on that specific age group, it's not the only age group that was leaving, but it's that when you talk to rural demographers who really are the guys that can get nerdy on this stuff, but they'll tell you that 20 to 24-year-old age group is really crucial because that's the young people starting their careers.
Hmm.
That's preparing to start a family, starting to have kids. When you're losing that population, it's one of the sure signs that you're going to start to have more deaths than births in a community, and the community is going to start to shrink. And so that's my home county of Sauk County to a T. The nearest town that I grew up on that our farm is at, each census goes down by a little bit. Um, Now at the same time, there's a lot of resilience. There's a lot of incredible families, a lot of incredible people, a lot of small business, not only farmers, but small business owners and people doing all kinds of things to revitalize and always trying to fight that. And every now and then you find a place that is defying the odds a little bit.
Hmm.
Also, I think it was interesting after COVID, you had some rural areas have
Yeah.
grown. So I don't want to make it sound too bleak, but the thing that's defined it has been battling that economic decline and shrinking population for decades now.
I have wondered, especially as we survive through COVID, if technology can be maybe not an equalizer, but at least an ally, in that for some careers there's the ability to work remotely, and if you can get that lightning quick
Yeah.
broadband, however it happens, whether it's through fiber or satellite, however it's going to be delivered, but if that can be a technological equalizer, if we can help more smaller communities by at least giving them that, so that the folks who want that quality of life can at least have that ability.
I think so. And it's the ability to do that and then think about what that translates into. If we can get more people either moving back to rural areas or having an existence that has a foot in those rural areas where the lines between the urban and rural economy aren't so stark, um, there's a lot we can do. That's more people, that's more ideas, that's more money, all flowing into the rural economy. And you got urban people who have the ability to either live or spend their money in rural areas in the way that they wouldn't have before. And you got rural people who have the ability to work jobs in the urban economy remotely and just getting more of that going back and forth in two directions rather than just everything shifting toward the urban economy as it has really since the 40s. I think that's a good thing. I don't know what it all will yield, and I think it's part of the solution on the farm issue, but more broadly, the issue with rural communities. I think it's a good thing. We just got to figure out what's going on and how to harness it, you know?
One of the reasons why I wanted to have you on was also your time in politics. And that is what I've primarily covered over my career. But it allows you, I mean, you're knee deep in it. I mean, you're on the staff side, you're on the campaign side, policy side, speech writing, right? I mean, you've got sort of
Yeah.
all of it, messaging, and you get to see how the sausage is made. And I'm curious then, as you left that, then how do you view our political system overall? Whereas as we're talking here in December, we're watching Congress in this lame duck session. They will have to take action before the members go home for break
Yeah.
to get some kind of extension again, or a re-extension, if you will, on the
Yeah.
farm bill. And I mean, I'm sure you know a lot of good people who are involved both as the elected officials
Yeah.
and staff. How is it possible that this is such a cluster?
Well, my first boss in politics, Lamar Alexander, who has a long, proud history of bipartisanship and solving problems with people on both
The
sides of the
flannel
aisle.
shirt guy.
The
He
plan,
traveled
the
across
pledge.
Iowa,
Yeah.
flannel shirt and a truck, I think.
That's it. You Iowa people, you know your candidates. Um, he said, stay in Washington, D.C. long enough to get inoculated but not infected, you
Hmm.
know? And the idea of that is I'm glad that I got the opportunity to see up close how the policy world works, what is going on in Washington, and also had parts of my career that helped me understand what's going on in state government too. So I got the chance to see it up close and understand some of the problems and challenges. And we tried with this book and as we're talking about these issues, just to be candid about the fact that both parties, you have 45,000 farms lost per year on average for a century. You got a problem that both political parties have contributed to. And it's going to take, both parties and everybody in between to fix it. And what I would say about the system is I think it's broken but not shattered. And I think that's a really important distinction because broken means there's cracks, there's some stuff that needs to be replaced and overhauled, but you can fix it. Shattered means poof, there's nothing that can be done. And I think it's really important. It's easy, and I'll spare no I'll spare no sharp words for our political system and our parties in terms of the way they're failing right now. But I think there's a difference between that and just this thing is something to lose faith in. I think there's something we can do about it. And that thing we can do about it is at the end of the day, and you see this, I mean, at the end of the day, politicians are still scared to death of the voters. I mean, they want the support, you know what I mean? I mean, that
Hmm.
manifests in bad ways and good ways. Um, but, the state of politics as it pertains to farming and the rural economy, agriculture, it's hard to imagine it in a rougher spot. You got the farm bill that is kind of consistently kicked down the road and basically punted, and kind of a quick patch is covered or passed. And that causes problems on two levels. One level, your listeners and farmers are well aware of, which is like if you don't have that farm bill passed, getting financing and all that stuff is incredibly challenging because even the private lenders, they're basing somewhat of what they're doing around what's going on with the farm bill and therefore the
Hmm.
state industry. So it causes those immediate problems. But here's the other thing. When we're rather than passing a 5-year farm bill with work in advance and broad bipartisan support where you could maybe roll up your sleeves and do some deep reform, you're really just kind of kicking the can down the road. You're not addressing any of the challenges. Are the programs all working the way they ought to? Are there things that need to be reformed? How are these programs affecting one another? Is there anything that's contradictory? We got such a tangle, and we really, really need Congress to have the ability to hammer out some meaningful legislation that can be worked on over time to try to address some of these problems. Because otherwise, we're just kind of perpetuating. We're just kind of punting at best. I mean, sometimes they're not even kicking the ball, which is what happened more recently with the Farm Bill not passing and us waiting to see what they're going to do.
And I've talked to Chuck Grassley, longtime senator in Iowa, the Republican who is a farmer, and they've been in farming for a long, long time. Of course, he's been on this earth for a long, long time because he's 91 years old. But I remember asking him, why do we do this the way we do this, in the sense that the farm bill is not just farm. You
Yeah.
know, it's the farm side of the farm bill, but then all the other stuff on the other side, you know, with nutrition and conservation and all kinds of stuff, and now a lot of green
Right.
energy sort of focus and all that kind of stuff. And
Right.
he's like, look, most of the members, many of the members have almost literally never stepped foot on a farm, much less
Right.
grown up on one. And he's
Right.
like, that's kind of the way it's got to be done. But you know, like, does it? Like, is your experience that that is the best way to get forward? Because that's what torpedoed. You had House Republicans who were focused maybe more on the farm side.
Yeah.
Senate Democrats over the this past term focused on the food assistance side of it and nutrition
Right.
side of it, and then it
Right.
all blows up.
Right. You know, I think he's right in stating the realities. And what I would love to do is figure out a way to change it, maybe by getting more people engaged and more people involved. You know, like, look, whatever people think of Chuck Grassley and his party, if there were more people in both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party that had Chuck Grassley's real life knowledge of what it's like to farm, I mean, go out and, check out what Chuck Grassley's been doing the last couple decades when he's not negotiating in Congress and he's on a tractor,
Hmm.
and that makes a difference. We have too few members of Congress who understand what's going on with farming on the ground, let alone how it affects and connects to our food supply. And so we can't totally turn back that clock. I'd love to see a whole bunch of farmers on both sides of the aisle elected. Maybe we'll have a wave of that at some point for one reason or another. But really, it's about their constituents getting more geared to it so that they're forced to pay attention to it. And so I always tell people, don't ask your elected official if they support the farmers, because you'll get your hand, the hand will go up, of
Yeah,
course.
of
Oh
course.
yeah,
Yeah.
everybody's taking a vote, they can say they support the farmer. Tell people to ask, what are you doing to create new opportunity for our farmers? And that takes a more thoughtful answer. Chuck Grassley could answer that question. Here's some things we could do. Democrats who are from farm states, and have similar horse sense might be able to do the same thing. But most of our elected officials couldn't do that. And so I think they need to hear from their constituents that they care about what's happening with farms and they care about how that affects our food supply and that these connections are made. And then it's not just some big horse trading deal where it's like, okay, yeah, those of you who care about the farmers, we'll let you have a little bit of something in return for everything we want with these food programs. We ought to have more engagement from our elected officials on the actual policy.
So maybe use your sister as an example if we can here, because it sounds like she's probably going to do the heavy lifting in the future for the family farm, as your dad kind of transitions off. But what if your family did not own the land? Like, how could someone like your sister get into this? Like, those are the people who fascinate me about,
Yeah.
aren't we going to be screwed if we do not have a system set up where somebody with the desire of your sister who wants to do this but doesn't have the family land,
Yeah.
how is that going to work unless your sister is willing, and she already does work off farm,
Yep.
but I mean, if, like, how's that going to work? Are we going to require all the newbies to have a full-time gig
Yep.
off-site to make the farming side work?
You're so right. And the answer is that we've got to change the long-term opportunity horizon for farmers in this country in general. I mean, to help people in that situation, but also to just help our family farms continue to persist. But also I think there's some specific policy work to be done around that exact transition of a farm that is being sold to someone who isn't in the family. And here's what I mean by that. A lot of your listeners know this, but for some like family like ours, generally the new generation would buy the farm from the old generation on land contract, buy it
Hmm.
from the parents over time, something like that. Sometimes there's other arrangements, but point is, you got you got farms that can only really grow a few certain types of crops where there's a market. There isn't a market for every farm to grow every kind of specialty food out there and all this stuff. We wish there was. We hope there will be.
Hmm.
But a lot of farms, it's like, well, we know we can make enough money growing corn. We know we can make enough money growing soybeans. It's not really enough. It's just barely enough. It's getting harder every year, but that's something we know we can do, that there's a market. And so even for a farm that the family has the land, it's hard enough for a farm like that to continue making ends meet from one generation to the next. When you add into that the idea that you don't have the chance to buy the farm from mom and dad, There isn't family land there. You got to go in and you got to, lease land. You got to take out debt to purchase land. That's prohibitive. So many young farmers can't get into it because of that. And so we need to, big picture, change things so that there's more entrepreneur opportunities for our farms, where our farms don't just have to grow those commodity crops they know they can make some level of income on, but they have more markets for more types of crops that can allow us to do new types of agriculture in this country. But the other thing we need to do is we need to figure out a way for it to be more economical for farmers who are of the old generation to take a risk on someone outside their family. Because there's a lot of old farmers who say, well, if my son or daughter will take over the farm, I'm willing to let them buy it from me over time, and I'll kind of take my retirement money a little more slowly. And, but if they don't have someone to do that, they're going to say, well, I'm not gonna, take a risk on a kid that I don't know.
Hmm.
Well, I just got to sell it for development. And then they sell the whole kit and caboodle. And so there's some people who are looking at, is there ways with the tax code or other ways that we can make it more economical for a farmer who says, I want my farm to continue. I don't have someone in my family who can take it over, but I want my farm to continue. And I'm willing to take a risk on a kid who's gone through an apprentice program or something like that, has shown that they're serious about this. Is there something, so there's different ways that I think we need to experiment around that issue, because at that moment that the farm is being passed along, if it's not going from one family member to the next, it almost always gets sold.
I wonder, I know you got to scoot here in a sec. Can you maybe bring us back to the book here? I mean, I wrote two of them. I know it's a process, and you've got a little girl who demands your attention at home these days too. So it's a good thing you got the book done before she became mobile. But what's your takeaway from this? I mean, your family was willing to open up about some stuff in this book. Like you talked about some of the stuff your dad went through. I mean, that's some deep stuff
Yeah,
to kind of bare your soul to talk about publicly, when, as you well know, a lot of farmers kind of bury all that stuff deep.
not
But
a real
what,
talkative group.
yeah, for sure. So what do you hope people take away from this, and maybe even, kind of a call to action?
Yeah. I really hope that people take away the resilience of the American farm family. It's not just my family, it's families all across this country. And so many of your listeners know families like it too. The difference between our family and most of the others is that we were willing to tell our story. And I think about my dad. One of the stories we tell is at the age of 8, he had to step up on the farm because his dad, my grandpa, slipped off a corn crib and broke his back on the frozen winter ground. He eventually got back up on his feet, but that was a moment where my dad started doing the work of a man and never let up. So he's 72 now. He's been doing that for 64 years. And that's a story of hardship for a child. But at the same time, my dad will tell you about those days, and he'll tell you about how he loved the calves and the clean country air. And, my dad right now, if he's not sleeping, he's on the back of a tractor.
Hmm.
It got down into his blood and his bones, and he had a passion for it, and he loved it. So I guess my point with saying that is the resilience of the American farm family is something that if we could bottle it, we could solve a lot of problems in this country. And we still got nearly 2 million farms left. 96% of them are family farms. So that's nearly 2 million families that are holding on to their farm, trying to figure out what they're going to do, despite the fact that we have a situation that really doesn't work right now. So imagine we make changes in this country to make it work. Imagine what we could accomplish with those nearly 2 million farm families still holding on. So the resilience of our farm families, and therefore our agriculture sector, is something that gives me hope. And I hope we can make some changes to harness that rather than smother it.
Brian, we appreciate the conversation. Thanks for it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate having me on. People can find Land Rich Cash Poor on Amazon, anywhere else online, bookstores nationwide. I just hope that people keep the conversation going and we can do something about these issues.
Awesome. You can read some excerpts from Brian's book, Land Rich, Cash Poor, My Family's Hope and the Untold History of the Disappearing American Farmer. You can find it in our profile piece about Brian, and that's in the American Farmland Owner Weekly Newsletter. Go to AmericanFarmlandowner.com. You can enter your email address. You don't have to, but you can. Enter your email address, and you can get the latest newsletters sent right to your inbox for free every week. Thanks for your support, and thanks for caring about the future of our farm.